When my kids were growing up, we read a book by Laura Numeroff. And maybe some of you that have kids or grandkids have read this book. And it starts off with this. If you give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask for a glass of milk. And then he'll want a straw, and he'll ask for a napkin. And that goes on as one initial action causes a chain reaction that goes on for pages and pages and fills up an entire book. We see that sort of chain reaction show up today in our reading from 2 Kings, from the Hebrew Bible. Naaman is the hero with a fatal flaw of leprosy that makes him an outcast. Imagine that, a man of war and a trusted advisor to a king who no one wants to be around. Even his spouse is worried, but the weakest link in this chain, a young servant girl, offers just a sliver of hope to him. Next part of the story happens as Naaman travels like a celebrity with an entourage to a different land, to the land of Israel. He has got power and the adoration of his men, a letter from the king, and lots of money as he travels to the land of Israel. And for the king of Israel, this could be almost seen as a type of veiled threat. Heal my servant, Naaman, or I will come to you. Come for you, I should say. We already know that there are skirmishes between Aram and Israel because of the enslaved Israeli girl that we hear about at the beginning of the reading. The king of Israel sends Naaman to see the prophet Elisha to kind of diffuse the situation in almost a classic case of passing the buck. But Elisha does not even bother to welcome Naaman. Elisha is actually kind of rude and only sends a servant out with a message. All in all, this is almost like a bad joke for Naaman. He does not feel seen. He does not feel heard. His offering of wealth does not guarantee a thing. One could guess that Naaman was expecting some sort of a magic trick, some sort of ceremony to match his status as the king's right-hand man, that Elisha would come out and say some words and wave his hands about, and he would be cured. And after so much time having the eyes and ears of people around him, for Naaman, a simple message seems like a loss of privilege and esteem. And Naaman becomes angry. His status does not even rate a cure in his own country. Naaman's pride complicates this situation. And as we see, the true wisdom that we hear comes from the servants who gently nudge Naaman to get into the water, to go to the Jordan and get into the water. After all, they are already near the Jordan River, and it's not a hardship, really, to try the holy man's cure. And thus, Naaman decides to humble himself and gets into the water, where his skin becomes clear. And he has to do this 7 times. And that suggests a cycle that he has to keep trusting in God. And doing it that many times, he has to let down his guard enough to trust God. Part of the reason I appreciate this reading is that it's that the servants are really the holy ones in this reading. The ones with the earthly power and might are not necessarily those who have God's favor. If all God needed for a prophet to cure someone was a pile of loot, including silver and gold and clothing, that would become a transactional vision of God. In essence, the more resources, the more religious clout that they had, the more God should favor them. But we have seen this heresy throughout history as people have donated money in return for indulgences, or those who had bigger pledges also had the pews in churches in the front and center. Or those who say the more favored you are by God, the more money you will manifest. And I believe that all of these are false teachings. Naaman cannot see that chain reaction until he trusts in something and a God that he cannot see. Elisha is telling Naaman that his healing will set the stage for a larger opportunity. And if we would keep reading this story, we would find out that Naaman returns to Elisha with his servants and proclaims his belief in God. The God of Israel, not the God of his own land, but the God of Israel, a God that he cannot see. Again, he tries to give money to Elisha, who refuses his offer of cash and clout and clothing. God's favor cannot be purchased. God's favor cannot be sold. We have a relational God, not some sort of transactional scorekeeper. Overcomplicating a situation is often tied up with a personal sense of entitlement or an inflation of ego. Instead of a step-by-step process that ties us in knots, we're just called to humbleness with our God. Now, one could ask what lesson we should learn from the story of Naaman. And to that, I would say that the lesson is not about the healing of the skin disease, of the leprosy. Instead, the narrative lays out basic ideas about wisdom and hope in our relationships. Now, I think we all know that being famous does not save us from the problems of this world. And we cannot create the step-by-step scenario to force God to do anything. It certainly does not give us a lock on wisdom, which comes from a humble heart. Naaman's healing comes from the wisdom of those who serve rather than ordering others around. So what does that mean for us? Sometimes there's no good answer for the chain reactions or events that happen in our world. This past week was a difficult one for many of us in Muscatine, especially those that work at Hy-Vee and at the CBI branch and Starbucks store inside of the building. Senseless violence caused the death of a woman in the store. In the past 72 hours, we have seen terrible photos of horrendous flash flooding in this country, especially in Texas. That same water that healed Naaman turned deadly. Our hearts are breaking, but we keep hope as we realize that God does not orchestrate such tragedies, but joins us in letting the relationships we build with our Creator and the relationships we build with others carry us through hard times and heals us of our ego. Now may we take that lesson and the prayers for strength and healing to others here in Muscatine and outside of Muscatine as we work to become the hands and the feet of Jesus. And sometimes we need to listen for God. And sometimes the answers that we get are simple, yet really hard. But we should always love God. We should always love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think in doing that, we will always be healed. Amen.